Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, and those of the alphabet community. I've got a good one for you. The glorious victories of trans athletes are shaking up sports. Some critics claim transgender athletes are ruining competition for cis women and girls, but they forget sports and life have never been fair. Whew. That's a good article title, isn't it? That's a way to grasp it and hold you by the fake titties. Let's read. The lovely picture of womanhood, right? If you don't know who this is, I'll read this. This is Laurel Hubbard, leading weightlifter from New Zealand who hopes to compete in the 2020 Olympics. Laurel here had a few years. I think it was like 2017 when they first came out. Started lifting and pro meets. It's got it right here. 2017 was their first one in New Zealand. I think they're from New Zealand, and was breaking a lot of records and got into the news with it. And it's kind of where this all started with this whole trans athlete thing. But let me start reading. I'll comment a little bit more on that later. Transgender athletes are having a moment at all levels of sport. They're stepping onto the podium and into the headlines. New Zealand weightlifter Laurel Hubbard won 2 gold medals at the Pacific Games, and college senior CC Telfer became the NCAA Division II National Championship in the 400-meter run. Another senior, June Eastwood, has been instrumental in her cross-country team's success. At the high school level, Terry Miller won the girls' 200-meter dash, Connecticut State Open Championship track meet. Now, before I continue going on, I want you to notice here, because they're going to mention it later in the article, the amount of transgender athletes that don't appear, that don't appear at the top and aren't crushing their divisions. I think it's not a super long article. 150 to 200 transgender athletes are currently competing in NCAA sports. And what you don't hear is any guy names in this. You don't hear any Gavins or Jeremys or Jamals. It's a bunch of girl names. And when you know it's with the trans men who decided to become women, they're at the top. You don't hear that. And they say, where are these other 150 to 200 trans people? Well, a lot of them are probably originally girls competing in guy sports. There's definitely a lot of manly wrestlers back in my day. A lot of trans guys who play basketball who just aren't as good because they weren't originally men, and they can compete with the normal guys, but they're never going to be on top except the other way around. When it's men becoming women, they have a distinct advantage, and when it's women becoming men, you'll never hear about them. So even if that's not even the whole amount, even if it's the even if they're just, let's say, 25% of that 150 or 200. That's still right off the top. That's right there. That's a whole chunk. And the issue hasn't even been, if you've read the other articles that have come out about this, the issue isn't these 4 or 5 that are taking up all the records. The issue is actually all the other ones. Because what you don't see is the other trans men coming in there, or trans women, however you want to say it, the men who go into become a woman. They take up all the lower positions. So if there's a top 8, let's say the bottom 2 are actually men and the top one's a man. Yeah, the majority is still women, but you pushed out more. You pushed out a third of the women, fourth of the women there. Anyway, including the top spot. Let me keep reading. I can discuss a little bit more on that later. These recent performances are inherently praiseworthy, shining examples of what humans can accomplish with training and effort. But as more transgender athletes rise to the top of their fields, some vocal opponents are expressing outrage at what they see as transgender athletes ruining sports for cisgendered girls and women. These issues have come to a head in Connecticut, where a conservative Christian group called Alliance for Defending Freedom has filed a legal complaint on behalf of 3 high school girls who are seeking to bar transgender girls from competing in a girls category. In Connecticut, as in more than a dozen other states, high school athletes are allowed to compete in the category that matches their gender identity, according to the ADF legal counsel Christina Holcomb. 2 transgender athletes, Miller and another runner, Adriana, no, and Daria, sorry, some of these names, Yearwood, have amassed 15 different state championship titles that were once held by 9 different girls across the state. The U.S. Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights is now investigating the group's complaint. Isn't that? See, this kind of shows what I was saying earlier. I didn't mention this part, but the thing is, at a certain point, women level out on how good they can be just physically. I maybe not how good they can be, but you know what I mean. There comes a peak to how strong, how fast women can be just in general, just on a curve, and then you get into the top, maybe I'll call it 80% of men. Once you get past the 80%, the women can't compete there anymore. So let's say you get a guy in the top, let's say 15 percentile of men in terms of his athletic abilities, like let's say these two are, all of a sudden they start crushing every record. And that's what you're seeing here. If you look in the men's record books, it's very hard. I've never seen a school like this where somebody can hold 8, 9 records. Even the top athletes I've seen hold 2, 3, 4 records. If you hold 4 or 5 records at a school, you are an absolute monster. But these two people have amassed 15 between themselves. The U.S. Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights is now investigating the group's complaint. As I said, nowhere are the debates around transgender rights as stark as they are in sports, where the temptation to draw a hard biological line, has run up against the limits of what science can offer. The outcome, at least so far, is an inconsistent mix of rules that leaves almost nothing resolved. In the NCAA, for example, transgender women can compete on the women's teams after they've completed 1 year of testosterone suppression treatment, but the organization doesn't place limits on what transgender athletes' testosterone levels can be. The International Olympic Committee has more granular rules. Transgender women can compete in the women's category as long as their blood testosterone levels have been maintained at 10 nanomoles per liter for a minimum of 12 months. Cisgender men typically have testosterone levels of 7.7 to 29.4, while premenopausal cis women are generally 1.7 or less. Meanwhile, the governing body of track and field just adopted a 5 nanomilliliter limit. So which approach is most fair? Fair is a subjective word, says Jonah Harper, a transgender woman, distance runner, and researcher who served on the IOC committee that developed the organization's current rules. It boils down to whom you're trying to be fair to. Harper says, to billions of typical women who cannot compete with men at higher levels of sport, or a very repressed minority in transgender people who want to enjoy the same things that everybody else does, including participation in sports. Transgender women's performances generally decline as the testosterone does, but not every male advantage dissipates when testosterone drops. Some advantages, such as their bigger bone structure, greater lung capacity, and larger heart size remain, says Alison Heather, a physiologist at the University of Otago in New Zealand. Testosterone also promotes muscle memory, an ability to regain muscle mass after a period of detraining by increasing the number of nuclei in muscles. These added nuclei don't go away, so the transgender women have heightened ability to build strength even after they transition. So what this basically means, if you've never lifted before, let's say which I have before, I lift 315 pounds, which is a pretty heavy weight for most average men, and then I stop lifting for a year or 2 years for whatever reason, I get sick or something. It is much easier for me to catch up muscle strength wise back to my original level. Even if my testosterone is lower, even if I'm not as physically active or haven't been for a long time, my muscles they rebound faster, and that has no bearing on what your testosterone levels are or anything like that. One way to address these issues, Heather and her colleagues wrote in an essay published by the Journal of Medical Ethics, would be to create a handicap system that uses an algorithm to account for physiological parameters such as testosterone, hemoglobin levels, height, and endurance capacity, as well as social factors like gender identity and social economic status. Whoa! Whoa! I don't know about that. They want to start including social economic status and their social factors into this. I don't know about that. That is something that should be kept out of sports completely. Things like your social economic status are what make sports the best thing in the world. It doesn't matter where you come from, how poor, what your race is, or anything like that. You should be able to compete on an even playing field with people of your same gender and weight, anything like that. That's why wrestling is my favorite sport, because you're one-on-one with somebody your own size, another guy, and you're just going one-on-one. There's no inherent disadvantage or advantage. You just have to take them on, and you have to beat them alone. And when you start making entire divisions based on social factors like gender identity and socioeconomic status, that worries me a bit. Whenever we've already got it. There should only be 2 of them, but let me not talk about that. The algorithm would need to be sport specific, and Heather and her colleagues acknowledged that producing it would be a difficult task. Another approach would be to create a third category for people who don't fit neatly into the male-female dichotomy, including intersex people who are born with mixed male and female traits. Let me stop right there. That I agree that I think a good idea would be a third, probably a 4th division. A 3rd division for obviously trans men, and a 4th division for probably trans women. As they'll say later in the article, maybe that's a good idea, maybe it's not, because of the amount of people that just are going to compete in that. You got 200 total trans athletes in your the entire NCAA. There's going to be, and probably none of them play the same sports, so you've got like the same 2 people fighting every wrestling match or on the baseball team. Like it just doesn't work. If you can combine the 2 if you want, obviously that still doesn't work. Or you can let them compete in the division of their gender or their sex at birth, not whatever they've transitioned to. Yeah, you can say it whatever you want about it, but that's only fair. If you want to handicap yourself, lower your testosterone or anything like that, that's fine. It doesn't hurt the other athletes. But when you're a man going into a woman's division, you have an inherent advantage. Just because of everything that has been noted here before, you're naturally taller, you're naturally stronger, you have muscle memory. If you were ever an athlete before this, or if you're ever big in general, you have an inherent advantage. Your organs are, like I said, your heart is bigger, your hands are bigger. There's a million different small advantages to be a man in a physical way, and it's just not fair. So I don't know what the answer there is, but I would say just to let them compete on or compete into their biological sex's division. It's fair, and nothing ever bad comes out of it in terms of this, like the trans men taking over the women's divisions. When you've got a woman going over the men's divisions, like I said, where are those breaking all the records? Where are all the trans women who become men? Where are they taking over all of the divisions? I don't see it. It's because it's not there. And it's pretty hypocritical, and it's pretty dumb to think otherwise, that's not what's happening, because the proof is right there. For all the hand-wringing about transgender women ruining women's sports so far, there's little evidence of that happening, even though we just talked about it. Although CeCe Telfer and June Eastwood garnered attention for their outstanding performances on women's collegiate running teams, they are hardly the transgender. Oh, this is what I mentioned earlier. Through their advocacy work, she has also interacted extensively with transgender athletes. She estimates there are a neighborhood of 150 to 200 transgender athletes competing. All right, and that's essentially the article. But I wanted to look at a couple other articles while I still have you. This is kind of a rebuttal to it by the National Review. Glorious Indeed by Kevin Williamson. Headline writing is a fine art. Wired is not very good at it. The glorious victories of trans athletes are shaking up sports, reads the headline of the deck. Some critics claim transgender athletes are ruining competition for cis women and girls, but they forget sports and life have never been fair. Well, what we have here is an anti-headline, i.e. the headline that obscures what the story is about rather than condensing it. You will not be surprised to read that this is not about the glorious victories of trans athletes, but the lopsided victories of biological male athletes in women's sports. As I talked about, I did not read this beforehand other than skim over it. This is a pretty obvious thought to come to because it's true. And as for that deck, imagine this conversation. I identify as a woman. Sorry, you still have to compete in the men's category. But that isn't fair. Sports and life have never been fair. I'll sue. What about a third category? No, that would be a freak category and it's not fair. Sports and life have never been fair. Cue litigation. This is a good one. And then I wanted to bring up a few of the examples. Obviously the Laurel one I had earlier, and then this one. This one was just from a few weeks ago. Rachel McKinnon is a cheat and a bully. This is a pretty good article. I'm going to link these below so you can read. I'm not going to read this whole article. But basically, Miss Rachel McKinnon's whole argument is that her doctor and her ID and everything shows her as a woman, so why can't she compete as a woman? Well, the problem is that she's crushing women's divisions when she was never a cyclist to begin with. So you're telling me this person who's never cycled their entire life comes in at 41, the same thing as Laurel Hubbard, comes in at 40 or 41 and starts crushing cyclist records. Give me a break. Give me a break. Doesn't that seem a little bit weird? And then if you look, I don't have the picture. You can also look this up just by Googling it. The recent record that she defended, you can see that she's clearly a head above every one of her competitors. She's a full head above all of them, and she wonders why. Just wonders why that people think it's weird. I don't know. And then last, let me see if I can bring this up. Transgender weightlifter Laurel Hubbard's gold medal sparks fierce debate. Well, if you want to know why it sparks fierce debate, it's because of the same thing I said before. Free to compete in next year's Tokyo Olympics, the 41-year-old. 41 is when Laurel started competing. And before this, hadn't competed since being in the juniors, which is 20 years ago or something like that, maybe more than that they were any good at this. They hadn't won anything since. They hadn't even been competitive. And then you look over here at their records. These records are pathetic compared to the men's. I understand they've transitioned and lowered their testosterone stuff, but your numbers wouldn't drop off this drastically within the time frame. The problem is this person was, as you can tell by the fact that they were never competitive when they were a junior, that they just couldn't cut it as a man in terms of weightlifting. So when they come back and start dominating the women's, crushing world records, it just makes you think, I wonder why this person with the giant long man arms and stands a foot taller than everybody else. I wonder why. Wonder why they're stronger. Really activates my almonds. All right, this video has gone on way too long, but it's just one of those ones I really wanted to talk about. I got a few dislikes on my last ones that mentioned transgender people, so I'm sure I'll get a million of them this time. But you guys let me know what you think in the comments below. I am very passionate about this kind of stuff as an athlete, somebody who enjoys wrestling specifically, weightlifting specifically, two of my favorite sports. I just want to mention at the end that I have nothing against people who are transgender. You can be whoever you want to be in this life, but you you can't compete against women if you're a biological man. I'm sorry.